Utilities. I'm Charlotte Mitchell, Chair of the Utilities Commission, and with me this morning are Commissioners Tanola D. Brown-Bland, Lyons Gray, Daniel G. Clodfelter, Kimberly W. Duffley, Jeffrey A. Hughes, and Floyd B. McKissick Jr. This technical conference is being held in docket number M-100 sub 163, which is titled "In the Matter of Investigation Regarding the Ability of North Carolina Electricity, Natural Gas, Water, and Wastewater Systems to Operate Reliably During Extreme Cold Weather." Due to the widespread outages experienced in Texas and the South Central United States during February of 2021, as well as the results of a joint inquiry into the Texas outages undertaken by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC, and the North American Electric Reliability Council, NERC, the Commission opened an investigation to consider whether North Carolina's electricity, natural gas, water, and wastewater systems are prepared to operate reliably during extreme cold weather, and whether the Commission's rules require changes in order to ensure reliable service. The Commission issued an order on January 26, 2022, initiating this investigation. The order made as parties to the proceeding the largest jurisdictional electric, natural gas, water, and wastewater utilities, and required these utilities to file responses to a series of questions related to their extreme weather preparedness by February 23rd of 2022. The order also scheduled technical conferences to be held today, March 15th, as well as on April 19th, for the parties to present their responses and answer follow-up questions. We're here today for the first technical conference, which will focus on the preparedness of water and wastewater utilities. The technical conference to be held on April 19th will focus on the preparedness of natural gas and electric utilities. We'll hear today from Aqua North Carolina and from Carolina Water Service Incorporated of North Carolina. The public staff, which represents the using and consuming public in matters before the Commission, will participate in the technical conference as well. The conference this morning is being transcribed, and the transcript will be filed in the docket as soon as it becomes available. All right, before we begin, I'd like for the parties to identify themselves for purposes of the record. We'll begin with Aqua.
Good morning. I will speak initially for the company. I'm Joanne Sanford, attorney for Aqua and for Carolina Water, and I realize you were talking to Aqua and not to me. But while I'm talking, we have Shannon Becker and Joe Pierce from Aqua here this morning, and Don Denton and Dana Hill from Carolina Water. So with that.
All right, good morning, Ms. Sanford. Good morning to you all, and public staff.
Yes, good morning. John Little, attorney with the Public Staff Legal Division, and with me is Chuck Junis, the director of the Water and Wastewater Division for the Public Staff.
All right, good morning, gentlemen. All right, Mr. Becker.
Good morning, Chair Mitchell and members of the Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at the technical conference. What we have prepared for us, I'm the president for Aqua North Carolina. I also have Joe Pierce, who's the director of operations for Aqua North Carolina. We have a brief presentation that we'll review that really just goes over the questions that were asked of us in the order. We've also reviewed the public staff's questions that were sent to us in advance, as well as the Commission's questions. So we're prepared to answer any of the details related to those questions. I'm going to hand the microphone over to Joe Pierce, as well as the clicker. Okay. And he will review the presentation.
Good morning. I'm Joe Pierce. I'm Director of Operations for Aqua North Carolina. I'd like to start with a nice picture on the front of our presentation. That's a picture from Texas for one of their systems. The pressure valve during the storm event froze in place and sprayed water. Made a nice looking huge snow crystal or ice crystal. Also covered a power pole, cars out on the other side of the parking lot. That was not a planned failure. It's not been fully recognized, but things happen that you can't necessarily plan for. If you would, I'm just going to try to go through the questions that were asked and a bit of a summary about what our answers were. The first question was about changes since Winter Storm Uri. The first change we made is we try to make inclement weather notices to customers prior to the event. We did that this year prior to some freezing rain events. Previously, we've done inclement weather notices prior to hurricanes because we can prepare for hurricanes. But after what happened with Uri, we realized there could be issues with loss of power for extended periods, that people need to perhaps store some water, that they need to consider they're under a system pressure advisory if there's a power loss, and to basically give them some forewarning. If the customers prepare, it helps us get through the event without it being as much of an issue for them and more of an inconvenience. The other thing that we've implemented, we started this back with Hurricane Florence. We have an inclement weather emergency response plan that's an internal checklist. I do have a copy of it available for staff that we can provide to them. It's basically preparation for the event. We start as soon as we find out about the possible event, as early as 7 days, and it's our preparations at 7 days, 5 days, 3 days, 2 and 1, of getting our materials and equipment together, of assigning people to roles for incident command system. What happens with these events, and I'm going a bit beyond my testimony, is that they are 24-hour events for however many days it occurs. So one person can't cover the entire event. So we actually set up teams of people across shifts. We assign roles. That's a big part of the preparation. It's how you handle it. We increase our staffing for SCADA, for our notification systems. We work with the call center, basically getting them prepared. The biggest part of that, what we can do is get prepared for it. Once you fall behind in an event, it's very difficult to catch up. So that's the main part of our program. The next question is about whether we forecast usage due to weather. Weather is monitored both locally and at the corporate level. You imagine actually get warnings from corporate about the weather event and how it's coming. There were some questions about whether customer usage is greater during winter storm events. Typically not. Our greatest water usage is during the summer and spring when people are irrigating. And there's a graph we'll show in a moment of what the summertime use is. Now, post a storm event, you can have increased usage, not so much at Aqua, but at some municipal systems where you have a large break and you lose your water towers. I've had that experience, but not with Aqua, with severe breaks, but not at the Aqua systems. Now, when the loss of water occurs, it's not during the actual freezing event. While things are frozen, basically customers don't have water, but when things thaw, then it breaks. So you will have to do some surveys if it's a severe case to find out where people have breaks. We'll have crews out following water meters, repairing water meters. I spoke to one of our employees who's been there 30 years, been through 4 events in those 30 years. And they actually have means where they can repair one water meter, take those parts, move them, do some minor adjustments with them, and then install it on the next water meter and basically reuse parts and keep the system going. But they have been through it several times. But after the thaw, they're dealing with the water loss. This is a graph of the water usage. If you'll notice, January and February, we're averaging about 4,000 gallons per customer. But between June and September, we're at about 7,000 gallons per customer. So demand in the wintertime is nowhere near as great. So the demand's not the issue.
And I'll add there that the systems are designed to be flexed to provide less water in the max capacity. The top or the peak hours is about 1.75 times what the low months usage are. So when we do have breaks, usually they're contained because we have self-contained systems, 750 independent systems. So we can actually isolate the systems where the issues are within those systems. But then even those systems are designed to be able to flex and provide additional capacity.
The next question was about codes design ambient temperature.
Mr. Pierce, before you move to question number 3, I'm going to go back to your responses to question number 1 and 2 for a minute. You referenced the incident command system. And as I understand it, and as you explained, as Aqua explained in the responses you all provided, it's a management system that's designed to enable communication and deployment of resources during an event. But can you talk specifically about what the incident command system is to Aqua? Who's in charge?
Sure.
Who makes that decision to institute the system, and how many times have y'all had have you gone into this protocol?
Command system. We first used it in Hurricane Florence. We've instituted it 4 or 5 times since then. I don't keep an exact count. I normally call for the ICS to get started, or Shannon asked me, is it time? And we're doing so. I'm usually rolling out the inclement weather emergency response plan first. And then as you see it growing, you decide to go to ICS. We actually start some events and then decide during the event if we need to go to a statewide ICS. We can also have them at the local area. If it's only one area, it may only be the western part or central or coastal for those areas. I usually make the decision to go to ICS. We'll have a pre-meeting beforehand. We're assigning roles. When I speak to ICS, we're actually following what's called the National Incident Management System, rolled out by the federal government after Hurricane Katrina. Katrina had real issues with communications and response. It's used by large numbers of the municipal governments. And we've used that here at Aqua as a means to ensure we've got 24-hour, 7-day, or however many day coverage. It does several things. So we'll assign an instant command. I'm not sure how much detail you want. We'll assign an instant commander. There'll actually be two, one for one 12-hour shift, one for the other. We actually have 3 people that normally fill that role. One of 3, depending on who's available. Okay, so
And who's qualified to fill the role? I mean,
myself, Shannon Becker, and actually Ruffin Poole. Ruffin knows the systems. And actually does a nice job with it. He was there for Hurricane Florence with me. I was new at that point. A few months in, when Hurricane Florence got here. We have an environmental compliance officer, it's Amanda Berger, and she'll either use someone on her staff as her second, or she'll use someone at our corporate offices as her second command for the second. We have what's called primary and secondaries. We have our operational technology officer. That's the person handling our SCADA and all of our outside programming. We have a public information officer. That's the person who is making contact with the press, the public, ensuring that we're covering with DEQ, even the Utility Commission, and customers. Because a big part of that response is how do you respond to customers? Because they want to know what's happening when they get water back, what's going to be the response time. Now, we have a finance officer to ensure we have the funds and resources we need to carry on through the event. We have a safety officer. What happens is it's very easy to get hurt when you're responding to an emergency, to these long-term events. People get tired, they're not doing their normal job, they're using chainsaws, they may be in ice situations. So safety is a big portion of it. That's where we start all of our meetings with that group, and that's what we cover with the staff. We have an engineering officer. They help support us with what systems, how we make the repairs, any of the more complicated requirements for resources. We do split it down by area. So inside our individual areas, we assign them as team leaders. We have task force leaders at supervisor level. We actually use our human resources officer as a personal resource officer. During the event, if employees' families need to be taken care of, human resources on 2 things. They're making sure their family's taken care of, because employees like to know their family taken care of during the long-term events, especially for Hurricane Florence. It became a pretty big issue for HR to reach out and keep in touch with them, make sure we had the staffing we need, and also help us ensure we had staff back that were away from work when the event started. We have logistics managers who is assigned that person and a backup to ensure that we can get fuel, get lodging, get food. We bring in out-of-state resources and our own to get through large events. You can imagine if you're bringing someone from, say, Virginia or Pennsylvania, you need to find a room for them and food. And lastly, a customer care officer. They're assigned through the customer call center to help ensure that we've got the 24/7 coverage. Our call center will be fully staffed 24 hours during a significant event with our staff. But we'll also use our outside customer call center to help support that. So it's a pretty significant system. They're trained on that. We've been using that now for 4 years, and I think it works fairly well. But basically at that point, when these events come along, we're all hands on deck. People don't do their normal jobs. It's a way to reassign them. They all answer to the instant commander, whoever it is for that shift, and then it goes down through that chain of command. Ms. Mitchell, I know it's a lot of presentation, but it's...
No, that I appreciate all of that detail, and tell me, the times that the company has had to implement the ICS, you said 4 or 5 times. Has it been in the summertime or in the wintertime, or a combination of both?
The ones I've been involved in summer and fall.
Okay.
The hurricanes have been
Okay.
the main issues.
Okay. All right. I think you were on to question number 3.
Okay. So the question was about coldest design ambient temperatures. We don't have a set number for that ambient temperature. We do build to the state design requirements. So their typical minimum burial depth for a water line is 30 inches. However, the freeze line is only 12 inches below grade. So we've got 18 inches or so of hopefully insulation between the freeze line and our pipe. Our well houses are heated, and external exposed items which can freeze are heat taped and insulated. In the overall system, the greatest risk for freezing of what's the Aqua's assets is the meter box. Meter boxes are usually fairly shallow and uninsulated. So those will freeze, and we have staff that will go during the event When they get those reports, then they will thaw meter boxes. There is a slight risk for hydropneumatic.
I'll give y'all a chance once these gentlemen are finished to ask questions.
During severe events, there is some risk of hydropneumatic tanks freezing, which I learned just a few days ago. And I have learned that they have ways to warm tanks with barrel heaters, which is interesting. I hope I never see it, but if they do, I'm looking forward to watching it. What gets so cold that hydropneumatic tank will freeze. The next question is about interruptible pricing tariffs, and no, Aqua does not participate in interruptible pricing tariffs. Our generators at our sites are usually pretty small, so we really don't have that capability to do that reliably. Do you have a backup plan for power loss? Yes, we do. We have a combination of fixed generators and portable generators. We have a pretty good sized fleet, 41 portable generators. These are between 30 kW and 75 kW, spaced throughout the state on the portables. So if you can, what will happen is during the event, we'll get power outage. We will give it a certain amount of time for power company to respond. If they don't, then we're rolling a generator towards that site. We'll hook the generator up, pressurize the system. It's a big system. We leave the generator. If it's small, we'll basically pressurize it and head to the next system with it. As far as moving those generators. Those generators are substantial generators. They have a storage tank, a double-walled storage tank below them for fuel. They will normally store 24 hours worth of fuel at full load. Most of these systems are not full load, so it's not a big issue with refueling those generators.
Mr. Pierce, talk some about fuel. So you said normally the generators would store 24 hours worth of fuel. Does that mean that for each generator you have associated with that generator a 24-hour fuel supply?
Correct. There's a 24-hour fuel supply under the generator itself. There's a fuel tank under the bottom of it.
And then how do you ensure that you've got sufficient fuel if there's an event that goes beyond 24 hours?
So these are all diesel generators, and we do what we can to move diesel around. We have a few 100-gallon storage tanks that are basically back of trucks. During Hurricane Florence, we reached out to others.
Okay.
So we managed to get fuel from the ports at Wilmington. Cape Fear Public Utility Authority helped us use their supply there. And it really diesel wasn't our issue, it was gasoline. The issue was not us moving, the generators didn't run out of fuel, our vehicles did.
So in advance of a weather event, how do you go and fill up all of the
We
storage?
part of the inclement weather emergency response plan is to fill all the vehicles.
Okay.
And they are full going into it, but we don't store gasoline.
And what about fuel for generators? I mean,
So all those are topped off.
Okay.
And we also have contracts with people to supply diesel to us. So we have fuel companies that will provide diesel. And so far we have never had to use that here, though, it's on the diesel side. And we'll speak later to the NC Water Warren, but if I run out of diesel, I would call the NC Water Warren to find out who has spare diesel, and we'll be buying some diesel from a neighboring utility. When things get really, during Hurricane Florence, NC Water Warren helped me get fuel for Wilmington.
Okay. If there, who is in charge? What member of the ICS is in charge of coordinating with Duke Energy or the electric power supplier about availability of electric service?
Instant Commander normally handles that.
Okay. And
We have a customer rep with Duke Energy that I normally work with for those items. And we're staying in contact for where I need to know if we have power. They can ping our systems, let me know if power is returned. And also we can let them know where I need them to get power back as soon as possible.
And so what I'm hearing from you is there is coordination with your electric power suppliers, and during previous weather events,
Sure.
you have worked closely with the electric power supplier to ensure restoration or verify whether service
Correct.
is being provided to your facilities.
Sure. Dwight, I'm not sure if I mentioned names or not, but Duke Power's individual with us was a good person named Dwight Moore, who worked with us closely on ensuring we got power back as soon as possible to our sites.
And does that gentleman assist you with both Duke Energy Carolinas sites as well as Duke Energy Progress site?
He's now retired. They've got a new person that we're working with now, so it's going to be a bit of training for us to learn to work together. If you can imagine, when they change staff, we have to go back through the process of gaining the relationship.
But I assume you've undertaken the beginning that work together?
We have.
Okay.
We've already got some other things working with Duke that We're doing well.
Okay. Well, that's of significance to this commission that the utilities are coordinating. So the
Sure.
more that you can tell us about that relationship, the better, in our opinion.
Sure. So while my current Duke person, we've worked greatly on trying to get the billing corrected, to get all the names right and the addresses right. And that's a big deal because we have 1,700 accounts with Duke Energy, whether it's Progress or Duke Energy. And it's been a major undertaking, a task. And Mr. Zavala has been extremely helpful in getting that done for us. And from that list, now I'll be able to help, he'll be able to help me out more with the emergency response. So if I contact with a meter number, it will show up saying Aqua on it. And so they'll know to respond when Aqua calls. And when I ask them, they can track accounts by Aqua and say where Aqua has lost power. Before, we had some misnamed accounts that I was having a difficult time getting fixed. So
Okay.
we're in the last 6 months, we've had a lot of improvements on the billing and account names.
Okay. And
I'm getting into extreme details of the business, but
that's helpful.
if you can imagine, Aqua is made up of several different companies, and every time the companies are brought in, they have to change those account names, and the account names end up being wrong that you can't track as well. We've managed to get them consolidated into a single set of names.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? I think I was on question 4. Next slide. Okay, next slide.
I did have,
Go ahead.
I
Sorry.
did have one question. You just mentioned a minute ago that your gas supply can become a problem. So what has been your solution, and are you looking at making any changes as this world keeps, having more cyber and other kinds of risks that we guard against?
Well, so the solution during Hurricane Florence were 2. One is we contacted a contractor who brought us in 500 gallons of fuel. Because we have some large contractors that do capital work for us, and I can call them and they will do everything they can to help us get through a situation. We have not yet put in a fueling station. If I end up in severe case for fuel, I'll be contacting the state and find out where they've got emergency fueling. Because when you build a fueling station, there are a lot of risk and liabilities. Spillage, leakage. If you're not in the business of providing fuel every day, you probably shouldn't do it. The state has supplies, both with their fleet services, their DOT. When we get to that point, you will find me reaching out to the State Department of Public Safety, Emergency Management, saying, please help me get some fuel so we can keep safe water. And I'm pretty sure they'll step up to the plate and help us find fuel, whether it's from their supplies or from other parties. I hate to say I depend on others, but we do.
We additionally have corporate who has some relationships with some prioritized local fuel vendors where they just don't sell to the public. But we've been able to arrange, I can't remember which storm it was, but it was recent. We were able to arrange to tag along on that priority service where our fleet was able to fuel at some of these prioritized stations that did not sell to public.
Right. We did have a few convenience stores that only provided fuel to ourselves and other private customers and retained the last of their fuel supply for us during the shortage.
Right.
That wasn't weather, that was the fuel shortage, to where we had people hold fuel for us.
So are those relationships that you either work on and maintain, so they're already in place, maybe through a memorandum of understanding or something, or right now it hadn't gotten to that point where you thought about having to do that?
As far as on the fuel,
Mm-hmm.
I don't currently have a memorandum of understanding. We don't.
Corporate facilitate, our fleet director up in corporate has a lot of these relationships. So when a situation like this happens, we reach out to corporate and other sister states that are nearby, depending on the level of need. In this case, our fleet director has those relationships. I don't know if it's an MOU or how we maintain those, but they were able to come through in very short order and help us.
We also have 2 national level emergency response teams we can call that they will bring in fuel. But they are the most expensive choice though, so we try not to call them any more than we have to bring in teams from other states that are nothing but emergency response. That's a last ditch call, and I've not made that call yet.
So it sounds like to me, it's definitely an issue that's on the radar, and that you take it into account, you have some backup
Right.
measures in place. But I take it to date, you haven't had a problem where you weren't able to get that fuel and
Correct. It has not stopped us yet from completing our service.
thank you.
The next question is about anything different for operations during cold weather. The primary thing is ensuring that our generators are fully functional. The fixed units are tested almost every week, but I'm pretty sure they're tested every week as part of their what's called required visits. The portables aren't tested every week. It's not part of the plan. They're not set to load. It's just not part of what we do. So we go back and we double check those. I mean, they're checked monthly. As soon as you go back right before the event, you make sure they start, you make sure the batteries are charged, make sure everything's good and ready to go. And the tire, well, we can talk about tires for a second. These generators that look so nice really are not intended to go 70 miles an hour down Interstate 40 and travel 200 miles. They're single axle trailers, and it's a bad day if a tire blows. So you'll actually find us, if I need to move three generators from the coast to, say, Kernersville, we will contact a hauling company and they'll put them on the back of a wrecker and they will drive them there. That's a safer way than us having flats on I-40. If you can imagine, you have a flat, you can also lose the truck, and not to mention worker safety. So actually moving those, they're fine for moving those trailers 40 or 50 miles, but don't move them 200. We learned during Hurricane Florence just how much those tires are not meant to go those speeds for those time periods, even with relatively new trailers. So it's a safety issue.
Mr. Pierce, does the company have a sort of a routine maintenance and operation program related to the generators? I mean, are you all regularly checking them?
We do.
Ensuring?
So we have an annual full maintenance done by an outside service company. And there are several of those depending on which part of the state they're in. So we don't have one contractor statewide. I've got 3 different contracts, different vendors. And then we have our operators and utility technicians testing the generators regularly. The fixed ones more so. The ones at the wastewater treatment plants and pump stations, those are weekly starts and monthly under load.
Okay, thank you.
Through the preventive maintenance program. The next question is, how do we monitor water supplies? Approximately 55% of our well houses have remote monitoring for both power outages and low pressure. So there's a way to monitor there that comes back across cellular. Cellular picks up at our SCADA facility, and then we know we've lost power or there's been a power outage. The other 45%, we are dependent upon either we do check the Duke outage map. It's online, see if those line up, so we may get some forewarning there, but typically the customers call almost the second the lights flicker to say we're losing power, and we're monitoring the call center. The call center is sending out work orders, and we are tracking those continuously. The next question is, how do you prepare for extremely cold weather? And that's our inclement weather emergency response plan checklist is implemented. That's the preparation for the storm. Question 6. What do you do if water is unsafe to drink? I wanted to break this into 2 items. One is if we just lose pressure, the water may not be unsafe to drink. It's not as well guaranteed though as if it's at full pressure. So we'll issue what's called a system pressure advisory, and we will recommend that they can either boil the water or use an alternative source. Unsafe to drink is a different term. Unsafe to drink means that you know the water is unsafe to drink. It may be bacterial, it may be a pollutant, it could be a parameter, it could be pH. Unsafe to drink means we are getting people to stop drinking. We are draining the system. We're going to every house. Those are very, very rare. Knock on wood. As far as unsafe to drink. So loss of pressure doesn't mean necessarily that your water is unsafe to drink. It's just not as reliable as when you've had a system that has stayed at full pressure. And the water that's been provided has been chlorinated. It came from a groundwater source. It's not a surface water source. So very little chance of it being bacteriologically contaminated. So we issue system pressure advisories, which do recommend boil water. They're not a boil water requirement. I hope the commission understands. It's a level of safety. Recommended. And we do issue a fair number of those. We have small systems that have waterline breaks, and when you have waterline break, loss of pressure, we let that group of customers know. We recommend until we get bacteriological testing back that confirms the water was safe to drink.
And when we issue an SPA or a special pressure advisory, They're sent out as soon as we are made aware of the break or the pressure loss. And then the sampling that we do is almost, well, once the repair is made, we return it back to pressure. We take a sample, was it 48 hours? 24 to 48 hours before we get the results back?
Correct. 24 is the bare minimum if we get everything perfect. It's usually 48, and it's okay 72 if it's, say, a Sunday, because the lab
Right.
turnaround.
So we issued a special pressure advisory with the intent of issuing a lift. After we get the results back from the sampling indicating that the water is safe to drink, we will then issue a lift of the special pressure advisory to those same customers. And we can triangulate or minimize the special pressure advisory to sections of customers within a system. It could be a street, it could be the whole system, it could be multiple systems. So we can triangulate where we want those special pressure advisories to go. So anybody with the potential to be impacted, negatively impacted, we can cover, and we do cover.
Would you all connect the dots for us here so that make sure we're all on the same page? Help me understand why loss of water pressure results in water for which you're going to issue the
There's,
boil water advisory.
so if the water goes below 20 PSI, it's actually the federal rule, there's a possibility of water that surrounds the pipe getting inside the pipe. So if that water outside the pipe is contaminated with bacteria, it can make its way into the pipe. So it's really the pressure in the water pipe is what keeps it safe. So if you lose pressure, you've got the possibility of water surrounding the pipe basically getting into it. So whether it's near a sewer line, septic line, God forbid, gasoline contamination, whatever it may be, that can make its way into the pipe.
Okay,
The
thank you.
pressurization of the pipe is another one of your safety factors.
And to clarify, we have a separate notice aside from the SPA, the Special Pressure Advisory, which is the boil water notice, which is what we would do when we have a do not consume. There's a do not consume. But a boil water notice is a mandatory boil your water before you drink. The SPA, the Special Pressure Advisory, is a recommendation.
Right. Well, and do not consume is boiling water. In the case of pollutant contamination, you may not want to boil your water. You can make matters worse. So we want to make sure that you're using the right mitigation for whatever the event that occurs. The next question was about what if we have no water? And we have a lot of things. We use a sort of a shotgun approach. We're doing multiple items. One is we're rolling generators, a site without power. We have a relatively nice 1,100 gallon water tank that is pressurized. Before the event, we will fill it with water. We will have it bacteriologically tested. It'll be ready for potable use if we have enough notice. It's one of those things we have to have notice for that portion to happen. We can supply bottled water. We used to supply bottled water more often, but believe it or not, that becomes a worker safety and health issue. If you deliver 20 or 30 cases of water, your back starts to hurt. We found that the customers seem to be just as appreciative of a small gift card for a local grocery store to get their own water, in which case it's not the handling nor the storage of all that water, which if you don't use it all, gets dusty in your warehouse. So we have gone more to the gift card to the local grocery store for the inconvenience. And also, if in a extreme situation, we got contract water haulers. The contract water haulers' water usually will not beat back to you. It'll be suitable for toilet flushing. And that's about the only real use it would have, unless people choose to boil it on their own. We also get assistance from NC Waterworn. NC Waterworn is primarily a municipal group, but also includes other utilities. Basically, it's a cooperative agreement to provide services in the case of emergencies. As part of that, you agree that if you provide services to others, you'll be reimbursed at FEMA rates. And if they provide services to you, you'll be reimbursed at FEMA rates. We first used it during Hurricane Florence. Steve Raleigh helped us out at one of our wastewater plants that was about to go underwater. We helped a little town out in eastern North Carolina because they had lost their pump stations. They didn't have the staff to wire it nor the generators. Our event was slowing down, and we sent down an electrician and a utility technicians, and we hooked up a generator, and we got their pump stations running. And so it's basically cooperation, whether it's Raleigh helping Aqua helping Raleigh, or Cape Fear helped us with getting fuel. It's basically a lot of utility directors working together for us all to meet a common goal, which is uninterrupted service. And there's no charge for NC Waterworn. And even when the event occurs, I don't know that everyone responds. I believe we should. When I say in case of Aqua, if we can respond, we do. It helps build that cooperation, like cooperative relationship. We can also get assistance from from Aqua's North Carolina sister states. During Florence, we requested assistance from both Virginia and Pennsylvania. It depends on who has what resources. During Florence, we managed to get 13 generators down from Pennsylvania. But you couldn't get them in Virginia because they used all, they needed those in Virginia because the storm affected them also. But our sister states do support. We do have some company-wide programs for emergency response, particularly for hurricanes, not so much for inclement weather. Pennsylvania seems to handle storms better than I think North Carolina or Texas would. And lastly, we can request assistance from State Emergency Management. We participate in the State Emergency Operations Center through the Web EOC. I've only reached out to them once we provided reports to them about how we're doing at Aqua. We use it so I basically track road conditions, weather conditions, do energy reports to them as far as number of outages. That's before they report through. You see things there you don't see on the news, different level. But if you end up needing something that you can't get through your local resource, you can reach out to them. During Hurricane Florence, the issue wasn't in Hampstead. The storm rolled around and went up through the Kernersville, Greensboro area and area called Oak Ridge. It had a lot of trees down. I think we lost 35 systems in 1 hour, lost power. And Duke was not able to get back to Oak Ridge very quickly. I think on the second or third day, we couldn't get generators there. So many trees down, you couldn't get to them. Bottled water ran out the grocery stores. We contacted emergency management. They arranged for us to get a trailer with water delivered to the local grocery store area. Luckily, power came back. We didn't have to do it, but they had arranged for it to happen for us. Now, we'd been paying for it, but they help you get that resource. And when I say emergency management isn't just a public entity. They help out private also. So that's why we stay part of that group. Next question is, how would you communicate with customers? For system pressure advisories, we provide information by email, text, and telephone. Those customers that provide us with that information. In the case of do not consume, we're doing door-to-door communication also. If we get to where we're doing a do not consume, I'm probably reaching out to our local health department also to let them be involved in the task of going door to door. Local health departments are key in that process. We may also use a press release for a larger event. How would you communicate with the government? We send emails to the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. We normally start that process before the event occurs. We normally tell them we're going to respond. A couple things we do with DEQ. The first is DEQ is scattered over the entire state, and they would contact our folks directly. There'd be 20 people contacting 20 people. We limit that now to where we have our environmental compliance officer corresponding with each regional office at set times of the day, usually 10 a.m., 4 p.m., with a set email giving current status. And they communicate back through her that we tend to send back through the system. It's easier to maintain knowledge that way as far as putting it to a central location with DEQ. In the case of with emergency management, we're contacting them through the Web EOC. And we also communicate with the Utility Commission and public staff via email. In the case of Utility Commission and public staff, that's normally Shannon taking care of that portion of it. But we try to key in on contact with during the events, we really focus on getting the event resolved. And the communication outside is sort of a secondary because we've got to get the event resolved as quickly as possible. What's our key customer message? The status of the water supply and or wastewater treatment. Any recommendations for boil water or alternative water supply? And lastly, expected time of recovery. We are conservative on our time of recoveries. You don't ever tell someone it's going to be recovered and you don't make it. So you try to make sure that you're giving them a reasonable time period for that so they can plan for how they're going to respond to the situation. Excuse me? I didn't mention it yet. So do you want to bring it? So we do have, there's something new at Aqua, which you may not have seen yet. We have a disruption map online. It's not quite as nice as Duke Powers, but if you pull that, if you're able to get to the internet during the event, you can go to Aqua's website, you can pull up a map and it will show you, if you'll put in your address or your zip code, it'll take you that local area and tell you what's going on in your area. There'll be a little polygon. It'll say, here's what's going on here and here's the expected time of recovery for you. I've not used that yet during an event.
It's new.
It's new. Well, I think the last question was any operational issues due to cold weather in the last 3 years? No. 2019, 2020, and 2021 have been relatively quiet for us for inclement weather events. 2018 was interesting. That was Winter Storm Grayson. They did have some freezing. They had a water tank up in Gaston County that froze called Mortuck Manor, and they had to thaw it. And they had a lot of water meters in 2018. They had to go and thaw. But that's my main understanding on 2018. I was not here for that 2018 event. I joined after that point.
Mr. Pierce, I recognize you weren't with the company, but what about during the vortex events in 2014 and 2015?
So on that one, I asked my staff, the 2014, I saw that question yesterday, and I asked the senior staff there. People have been there, I say senior, they've been there 30 years, and they didn't seem to remember it. So I apologize, Commissioner Mitchell. I don't have an answer for you about 2015 event. Grayson, I was working for municipality when Grayson hit, and they lost a water tower in about an hour and a half, but not for, they had actually had sprinkler heads freeze in unused buildings at the university. And so sprinkler heads all open, you lose your water towers. Thankfully, we had other options. We had 4 or 5 million gallons of water we could use until we could figure things out. But there are other things that happen. If we end up with a severe event, we will probably end up enlisting people to go door to door. Because what happens is water lines freeze under people's houses. So it's not your asset that freezes. The lines on people's houses freeze. And then when those thaw, you lose water through those people. So you'll need to go door to door and figure out if you've got water loss. And basically check the meter and cut off meters. And the city I was working for when Grayson came through, the fire department actually visited about 12,000 homes over 3 days and cut off water because we had over 80 little line breaks under people's homes. But at Aqua, the 14, 15, I don't have any information on. I apologize.
And Chair Mitchell, I was in Virginia in 2014 and 15. I'm not aware of Tom Roberts, my predecessor, having to go through anything significant. In Virginia, the extent of our issues with regards to those events was really frozen meter boxes. Just getting out and trying to prepare individuals of how they can unfreeze their own. But it was really very limited.
In Texas, after they had their freeze last year, they called us to ask how to unfreeze meter boxes. And we told them the way we did it, the good way and the bad way. We told them just use the good with the torch. So, and to stay away from the plastic meter box and stay away from the plastic meters with a torch.
Sounds like good advice. I hope they took it.
I think they did. I think they were busy, but I didn't get a lot of feedback.
All right, let me see, check in with commissioners. Questions for Aqua before we let the public staff loose. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Could you talk just a little specifics about your communication channels with customers? I've just been, both as a consumer and on the Utilities Commission,
Sure.
curious about how connected are we to people with cell phones? Is it a volunteer opt-in? Do you ever kind of go through and do tests to see, are you reaching 80% of your customers with text messages or 20%? Just, some general
Give us a moment. I think I've got an answer for that one.
Okay, great. I'll try to come up with a question you don't. Let me see.
Sure.
Set of questions. Give me a moment here. Good. In the case of email, we have 68% of our customers connected via email. 68% of our customers connected via email. In the case of phone, it's 97%, which is
Yeah.
actually lower than I thought. I thought we'd have, so apparently 3% of our customers don't give us a phone number.
But not full 97%. And did they have to opt in, or you get their number and they don't get a choice for some of these things?
I believe our current applications, you have to give a phone number, but these may be old customers.
We
Customers
do.
been it for a while.
And you can opt in and you can select a method by which you like to be contacted. And you can pick multiple, right? So by phone, email, or text, and all three.
Text is 51%, which is still pretty good. And when you think about that, on the municipal side, I don't know if sure if they do the same thing. I've never worked for a municipality that provided email, phone, and text for events. But I may not work for the best utilities either on the municipal side. And you know where I work, Commissioner Hughes. So It's a fair percentage, and some of it does depend upon affluence perhaps though. I know that maybe in Bayleaf, the North Raleigh area, we're at about 80% saturation, 86 on email. We had to deal with that, look at that before. It's a pretty high percentage. But they also communicate in other ways. There's this thing called Nextdoor. So you send the comment to one, it travels pretty quick on their own social media sites.
Great. Thank you for that. No, it's very, very interesting. We asked you most of the questions about water. You talked mostly about water. Are there any unique challenges that you've faced, both in a cold event and just in general with your wastewater systems? Particularly, I think of the systems that are heavy with grinder pumps.
So
What happens when all those individual assets that you might not control might go down for extended periods?
So there are two things. Grinder pumps we can speak about first. Power goes off for extended period. Those homeowners don't have a way to flush. For all purposes, their tanks will fill, and when they all come back on, they'll come on simultaneously. You will lose a fair number of your grinder pumps will fail because they're not meant to run for hours on end. So it is a higher failure rate. During Hurricane Florence, I think there was one particular area we lost maybe 20% or so of the grinder pumps failed, where they ran so many hours they overheated and failed. So it is a greater failure rate for grinder pumps. There are homeowners that think we should go home to home and hook up generators, and that's really not an option. But when they signed their agreements to those homes, that was in their agreements that we do not provide power service to grinder systems. That's their responsibility to provide power. When all those grinder pumps come on, they can also overload the wastewater plant temporarily. Normally, we've handled that fairly well with the plant itself. So grinders are an issue. It's not gravity. It doesn't get to the wastewater plant. Gravity always works, almost always. So it is a greater risk for those homeowners on grinder pumps. The other thing that can happen is these are small wastewater plants, and a lot of them use something called an airlift for return activated sludge. When things get really cold, that airlift line can freeze. And when the return sludge quits working, then the clarifier build up and your plant has an issue. And so you can have some issues with plants themselves. I have seen plants in North Carolina that we operating at 1 degree C, and they're still producing pretty good wastewater, which shocks me. I'm not sure how it does anything at that temperature, but it's still doing it. So the plant itself will run, but it's called the RAS line, rapid sludge lines will freeze on some. We have to watch those. We will increase those flow rates to try to keep them from freezing.
And just, back to tie to the first question, I mean, with contacting people with grinder pumps, you mentioned door to door. I mean, do you have a separate text you send out just so just the people with grinder pumps can get?
Right. So when we do these system pressure advisories and SPLs or any notice to the customer, we actually take a GIS map, draw the map on who you want to contact, and we do custom messages. So we'll send messages about grinder pumps. In fact, even our standard inclement weather includes a small note about grinder pumps. When I say grinder pumps are a greater risk system, so we do reach out to those people alone. We try not to send a grinder pump message though to non-grinder pump communities.
That's right.
Yeah, tend to get confused.
Go ahead, Commissioner McKissick.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Just one question. And I appreciate your presentation. It answered the questions that were posed pretty thoroughly. It's broad, expansive, so I appreciate that. Are there any measures that have been taken by other water companies in this same vein in terms of preparedness that you have not adopted or implemented, for whatever the reason might be, perhaps cost, that you feel would be things that might be worthy of implementing longer term, but they're not part of your toolbox today?
Jim, may I speak about Texas? Texas had something called Senate Bill 3 that was passed. Texas is currently evaluating and getting pricing for putting a generator at every system, every water system, every wastewater system. I haven't heard what the final cost is going to be for Aqua Texas. If you can imagine, we directly talk to each other. We looked at that after Hurricane Florence. Aqua's going to put a generator at every water system and every waste, every possible location. And we were back then, I think back of the envelope was $25 million for North Carolina. Now it'd probably be 40 or more to put generators at every system. I'll say that there's two things we'll do. It'll increase and there's also an operations cost with that too, to maintain that many generators. That will increase the liability. It's greatly increase the cost. It will reduce our safety risk at Aqua because driving generators around is dangerous. But it's also $25, $40 million to put generators at every well site, you know, every well treatment facility. So that's probably that's the one we have not adopted. And that's to have generators installed in every system.
And typically, those generators, I mean, then would they be powered? How would they be powered typically?
So, there's some debate at the state about what's allowed around a well.
Mm-hmm.
Some parts of the state, which will allow diesel, those will require natural gas or low LP. The thought being how quickly you can contaminate your well. If you use diesel, you'll get diesel spills. Diesel spills then impact the groundwater. Then you've got groundwater entering your well. So if it was my choice, I'd be using LP gas or natural gas. But there are some areas of the state where they allow diesel. But if I was going to do a new one, I'm putting in LP or natural gas. Our portables, that's really not an option for a portable, but we're not leaving our portables there and fueling continuously at the same site.
Have you given any thought to perhaps increasing over time the number of generators that might be at the more strategic locations that might help, you know?
At some of the higher producing wells, we have one in particular, a large well in Bayleaf that's equivalent to probably 10 other wells.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be a lot of money. It's going to be a fair amount of money to put a generator large to serve it, but we probably will put a generator there in the next year or two on the key ones.
Sure.
And the generators we have at well sites, we have some now, but they're at the coast because of the high capacity well. And by having a generator there, it allows you not to build as much water storage. It was done for a financial reason, a prudent reason, was if you put in generators, it allowed you to have less water storage and that cost of water storage. But we could consider them for the ones that I consider probably the high production systems first.
Exactly. Very good. Thank
We do
you.
continuously assess the risks of the different wells and the sizes of the wells to assess whether or not we should acquire additional mobile generators. So that's something we're always looking at. And if the risk goes up for a certain well or an area, and we think it's prudent for us to position a generator in that area, we will go ahead and acquire one in our budgets.
Right.
Got it.
We do typically, we put fences around the areas we're storing generators because they are with wheels and a tow hook. They are, even with a low jack GPS unit, they're still very attractive units for resale. So yeah, they're not a good solution. And even then with the portables, we have a lot. We have a fair number. We have 41 portable generators in the state, 19 in the west, 10 in the central, 12 in the coastal areas that we jockey around. But as far as staff, they're really qualified to take those generators and hook into power. That's probably as many staff as I have also. They're really good at doing that. Most staff, I don't feel comfortable with hooking a generator up. Now, if they have quick connects, one thing, but we don't have that many quick connects either. So you basically, I've got the right number. I feel like I've got the right number of portable generators for the number of staff I have that are qualified to drive them and hook them up. They will have other people with them that assist, but as far as really qualified, almost electrician to hook one in.
And how often do you test the generators that you have today? I mean, to make sure they're fully functional and operational so that when they're dispatched, they are.
So they're load tested before delivery. We don't do that much load testing. We do not load test the portables. The large ones are tested against the systems they're operating.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the portables, we don't load test. It's a pretty expensive task to do.
I see.
But I'm not aware of ever having one fail where it didn't produce, say it was a 30 kilowatt generator, didn't produce 22 or 23 as is specified.
Very good. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, let's hear from the public staff. Questions?
Your Honor, I'm going to defer to Mr. Junis.
All right, Mr. Junis, you're up.
All right, so I'm let loose now, all right? If it would still please the chair and this this commission, could we have Aqua file supplemental responses to our questions that we sent last week?
All right, gentlemen. Are you, Mr. Junis, are you asking them to supplement with the information they provided here today?
To address all those questions. They've hit on it a little bit, but I'd like full responses to all those questions.
All right, well,
And as opposed to taking up folks' time in this hearing and asking every single one of those, I think it'd be more efficient if they submitted in writing.
Okay, are there specific questions you'd like to ask them to respond to more fully, or all of them?
I would say more fully to all. I was trying to keep track, and I would say we've gotten partial on a couple of them, but they have not all been addressed.
Ms. Sanford, do you have a?
Oh, I don't need to press that button. I'm just looking around my part of the room here. We perhaps would, I think, follow up with the public staff in a conversation to figure out where we need to emphasize, or I think that a discussion is in order, and then the companies will certainly commit to a written follow-up.
All right.
That'll
Sounds
work.
good.
I mean, based on what we saw from Carolina Water, it seems like they've addressed those questions and will further in their presentation. So I'm going to avoid those right now, but I do have some follow-up questions regarding the presentation. Mr. Pierce, you had mentioned meter boxes as being one of the primary concerns for freezing. With the shift to AMR, AMI capable meters, obviously then the access to read the dials is not as frequent. And so is it appropriate to start or at least consider insulating meter boxes, especially perhaps in the most vulnerable systems for cold weather impacts?
Well, there's one nice, think if I may answer. There's one nice thing about the AMR meters, and they will give us notification of leaks. If there's it's 10 straight days with certain gallons, 1 or 2 gallons per minute, it'll provide a leak notification during part of the read, and it will allow us then to notify the customers about a leak. As far as insulating meter boxes, I've not evaluated what that cost would be as part of those projects. I'm not aware that's a standard procedure for others, but in the Northeast, of course, they store their meter boxes under the buildings, under the basement, so that also frees. But I can review and see what the cost would be for that project.
You just mentioned AMR meters and leak notifications, but that information is only available when you actually go collect those readings, right? So it's not instantaneous data.
Correct.
Or even available in a short period of time unless you go out and read those meters remotely.
Correct. And if there is a situation where we're looking for a leak in a system, we will send out someone to read the AMRs to try to notify customers.
Also say there's error reports if we do happen to have, I guess, a frozen meter when we actually do the reading, and maybe the reading is not accurate. We get error reports when it's not working correctly or if there's a variance. So we'll use the error reports, but then we also know when we go back the next month, it will usually true itself up. Again, looking at the cost benefit of insulating the meter boxes, we have not done.
Again, with the error reports, that's only available after a reading has been done.
Right. So if you don't get a reading, we'll know we didn't get a reading. It will we automatically do an estimate based on historic usage. And then the next month, assuming the freeze event is over, it's likely that you're going to be able to get a reading, or if it's damaged, it will tell us so, and we'll eventually go out there to do a check.
Okay. And again, to clarify, that requires a truck roll that somebody's driving through the neighborhood to pick up those readings.
The meter reader, when they do the route, is in a truck, yes.
There was conversation about, I think this was in response to question 6 regarding sort of cooperation. There are 2 questions there. Has the company ever coordinated with FEMA as part of that process?
No.
Okay.
The EOC, as you're going through this process, they'll make determinations about, well, they'll say it may not be, basically you may not be eligible for FEMA recovery, and I'll say, understood. We still want the help. FEMA recovery is not, during the event, that's not our main concern. If FEMA, it does make it available, we'll use it.
Also regarding supply of water, does the company has some emergency interconnections with municipal or local government systems, correct?
A few.
Specifically, you have an emergency connect to Raleigh for the Bayleaf system, is that correct?
Raleigh for Stonehenge.
Okay, Stonehenge.
Stonehenge is a smaller system just south of Bayleaf.
So that's potentially one other source of water if you had a unsafe.
Anything that creates an issue with providing water, correct.
has the company considered additional potential emergency interconnects or switching systems to
We
potential
have-
purchase water?
We have others. But normally that's where the other utility, we have some with PwC down in Fayetteville. Our systems, if they're putting a new line that stops near ours, I ask for them to give us a quick connection. We're trying to get some now with, for instance, Apex, where their lines terminate near ours. The people that will not annex, they will not provide water to, but their line stops near us. If I can get an agreement, I've got to sign an agreement with Apex for emergency water supply for one system in particular. So we do everything we possibly can to keep people in water, and that includes using our neighbor's water if they'll let us use it.
I think this was regarding, Oh,
Mr.
sorry.
Hughes, one thing about that though, when these events occur, if the neighbor has water supply issues, they're not going to allow you to hook on. I dealt with that on the municipal side where I was with the city and I was able to borrow the county water until the county got in trouble. Then the county closes their valve and you're swimming on your own. So just to understand that if the event's severe enough, even Raleigh could have an issue in North Raleigh and not be able to provide their connection to us. Municipalities are hit pretty heavily also during these events.
I think this was regarding question 7. You talked about basically quick connects for auxiliary or backup power. Is that now a design standard when you're putting in filters on systems to put a quick connect on those wells?
I don't think so.
Okay. Do you have an approximation of the cost to install a quick connect? Basically a retrofit?
Not off the top of my head. It's not a guess that I'd be willing to make.
Would you mind providing that information as a late filed exhibit?
No. I think it's more than 1,000 and less than 10,000, and probably closer to 10. It might be more than that these days.
When you talked about potentially, I think it's Texas Senate Bill 3, basically a generator to every, I think you said system, but also perhaps switch to every well, lift station,
Yeah. I
wastewater
don't
treatment
know.
plant.
So I know so Texas is different. I don't believe they have generators currently on their wastewater plants, as far as Aqua Texas, on their wastewater plants, on their pump stations, or on their water systems. So they are currently deciding where they put the generators first, what the time frame is, and how much it's going to cost.
Yeah.
I believe there's a lot of money being put just into the study because of what's going to happen in the future, what type of cost they're going to do with it.
And for reference, how many wells does Aqua have in North Carolina?
1,300 and some, I believe.
And most of those are basically isolated away from each other, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Our average 49 connections per system.
So,
It's in upper 40s, low 50s. If you take out some of the larger systems, Bayleaf is one system that has 6,000 customers, so, and the Cape as well. But on average, it's about 50 customers a system.
so even if there was, say, some efficiency that you could say under emergency circumstances, you don't need backup power on every single one of those wells, but because they are isolated, you're looking at pretty close to that number of potentially generation to meet a standard like that, correct?
Probably 700 to 800.
On just the water side.
Right. We have over 700 individual systems, so every system is going to need at least one.
Yep. And ballpark, I think you have at least some generation on, well, let me ask this. How many lift stations does Aqua have for the wastewater side?
Probably a second. I'll look it up.
All right.
You mentioned, or if I may ask, you mentioned questions earlier. We've received 2 sets of questions yesterday. Which ones are you looking for responses to?
I think we sent our questions either Thursday or Friday.
It took us a while to get through to get to me at least.
Ours were numbered similarly to the commission's. So basically we use them as follow-up questions to the 7 questions posed by the commission. The top of it has the docket number and then the company name, and then it jumps into like question 1, there's parts A and B.
Right. If I might, Chair Mitchell, we received your questions last week, Mr. Junis, and then yesterday we received some questions from the commission staff.
Repeat your first question again.
Well, all right. How many lift stations does Aqua have?
Um,
Aqua and C. Sorry, I don't want all of Aqua.
Gotta find the right set of answers. I think it was around 187.
And how many of those have permanent backup generation?
Um, 79. So it's 44% of our wastewater pump stations have generators, so 79 of them.
Okay, thanks.
So Aqua has 79 pump stations with generators, and that's 44% of our pump stations.
Sorry, I'll slow down a little bit. I get so excited by this stuff. And I'll be a little more careful not to dive into those questions that we've asked you guys to respond in writing. But I'm just trying to add context to this number that you threw out of the 25 to 40 million. That's what you had in your head when you were coming up with that number, right? Is putting backup power on that other 56% of those lift stations and
Well, it's
approximately.
primarily the water systems. I mean, the water system's where the big count is, and most of the generators need to be installed. In the case of the pump stations, those that we have were installed because of regulation.
Right.
Required because of their capacity.
And I think Carolina Water's done a great job on hitting on that in their supplemental answers dealing with, storage of finished water. You brought that up. The need for elevated storage, or if you have those high capacity aquifer wells. But I would say, how do you have a ballpark on how many wells would fall into that category of high yields, over hundreds of gallons of water per minute?
So I think it's all but 2 of the ones. So on our wells, we only have 13 generators. I believe 11 of those are high capacity. And we have two other wells with generators where the developer installed them originally. And if they install them originally, we'll maintain them.
Has the company considered making that a design standard for new systems?
It's not required by the regulation. It's difficult to require things for new developers that are not required by regulation.
If the commission had made a requirement for that as a new design standard for new systems, would that level the playing field with other private utilities?
If it was applied to all private utilities, it'd probably be best though to make it the same for private and public. Publics do operate as an enterprise, not as a social group, so it would appear that the same rules should apply to both. And I'm trying not to be political.
Forgive me, Chair, I'm just running through my notes to make sure I've asked the follow-up questions that I'd identified. So Chair, I've run through my questions and we just look forward to, like I said, those ones that we submitted in writing to get addressed.
And we look forward as well to discussing the whole panoply of questions. As I say, some came in last week, some came in yesterday. Some are answered here, some here. So we'll pull this all together after the hearing.
All right, I'm counting on you all to do that.
We will.
Okay.
We promise to cooperate on that.
All right, perfect.
There may be a few marked confidential because of the Infrastructure Security Act that we don't want widely distributed.
All right, that's no problem. All right, let's do this. All right, Commissioner Klopfelter.
I've saved it till now. I have a question that has nothing to do with the topic of the day. It's a curiosity question. So on your seasonal usage chart, in most of the 6 years, there's this funny little dip in August and then a peak in September. Is that vacation? What's going on there? Is there something
So
weird going on?
I think that's the Bermuda people seeding fescue. There was the fescue seeding season. So
It's September. So they're putting the grass out in September. That's why you have a
Don't quote me on
September
that.
peak.
I don't have a master's in the seeding schedules, but it appears to be that's the seeding.
I just, again, you have a little dip in August and then it goes back up. And I was just curious what's going on. I thought it might be vacations or something.
Internally, we attribute it typically to irrigation, unless
Okay.
it's a very wet season, in which case that will not hold true, but for the most part, September is an increase.
Thank you.
All right. At this point, we will take a 10-minute recess for our court reporter. We'll come back with Carolina Water on the stand.
Huh?
I use a black mouse.
So, yeah.
All right, let's go back on the record. So we've got Carolina Water. Y'all may proceed.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Don Denton, President, Carolina Water. With me is Dana Hill, our Director of Operations for our Eastern Region. A lot of our answers are going to be very similar to what Aqua had earlier this morning, but I would love to have a good dialogue, and if there's questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Dana's going to walk through. We don't have a presentation the same as Aqua, but we do have a handout that hopefully everybody has a copy of with our responses. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to Dana.
All right, good morning. Does work? Yeah.
Yep.
So I thought we'd take that initial list of questions, if it's okay, and we'll just walk through those. Then we can move over into any of the supplemental follow-ups that you want to address in any more detail. So the first item was a question of any changes that had been implemented since the February 2021 events in the Texas area. I could say that we haven't made any changes directly related to those events. We have made some improvements that would certainly benefit the company and our customers in that type of event, as well as other natural disasters and other disasters. The biggest of those changes, I think, are how we communicate with our customers and give them prior knowledge of events and preparations that they need to help us make to maintain service. We've implemented the My Utility Connect system, which is an app, a portal that our customers have access to, in addition to being able to go in and see their consumption, their outstanding bill amounts, and that type of thing. We're able to push messages out on a specific, system-specific area to those customers. In addition to being able, we also maintain a list of email addresses, cell phone numbers for text, telephone numbers for voice calls, and we're able to reach out to them in those manners as well. Another improvement that I believe we've made in the last few years is we also have a much more cooperative relationship, I'd say, with our electric providers, Duke Energy being the largest, but also some of the smaller co-op utilities in the rural areas. We as well have a specific account manager in our area that we can reach out to directly to talk about, outages that we feel like require a faster response than others. We're able to talk to that account manager about anticipated timelines for restoration, so that if we need to take a step further on our response, and that's worked out to be a very good relationship. So I don't know if we need to stop at each question or if you want me to just roll right through. Yeah.
Keep rolling.
So the second question was whether or not we forecast usage due to weather, and we don't. We really don't really have a manner to do that, I would say. We don't see huge variations in water usage when we talk about extreme cold weather. We see more of those extreme seasonal variations in normal usage, but not directly related to colder weather activities. Next question was speaking to the coldest ambient air temperature at which we could operate the system. And I'm not able to provide a temperature for that number. Our systems are designed by NCDEQ standards, so all mains are buried at that 30 inches or below the frost line depth that Mr. Pierce mentioned earlier. All our exposed piping are wrapped with both heat tape and jacketed insulation. We do have some piping that remains exposed. That's generally dealing with our wastewater treatment facilities, and it's just simply because those pipes are very difficult or unsafe to access to install that heat tape and insulation. Those lines would generally they would generally maintain a fairly high rate of flow. So during cold weather events, their susceptibility to freezing is very low. Both in terms of the volume of water moving through the pipe as well as the biological activity that's associated with wastewater.
I actually have a couple questions for you on your responses to this particular question. You mentioned heat tape. What exactly is heat tape?
So it's really just you have an electrical cord, drop cord, that routes into really just an exposed wire. So it's a flat piece of tape that you lay against your pipe, you wrap it with insulation and plug it in, and it just brings that temperature up to, above freezing levels.
So how is it powered?
Electricity generally is plugged in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so for those facilities that are wrapped in with this heat tape, is there a generator backup for the heat tape? I mean, what happens if the electricity goes down?
Sure. And so on the facilities that don't have a stationary generator, the heat tape goes out along with the electricity. So back to my earlier mention of the jacketed insulation that's around the pipe. So the heat tape's really a secondary protection source, just a matter of comfort, if you will. To us, the jacketed insulation will also go a long ways in protecting that.
Okay.
asset.
In the company's written response, you all indicate that wells, pump stations, and other critical facilities are heated. What is the heat source?
It is also electricity.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And how many of those facilities are backed up by generators?
Of the wells,
Well, those facilities that you've heated.
let me flip over to it. So, yeah, about 4.5% of our wells have stationary generators that will automatically come on. And those heaters that are installed in the well houses are a part of the well house electrical circuit. So when either the stationary generator comes on or we move a portable generator in to recharge that system, it also runs that heater while the generator's running.
Are all of your just so I'm clear, the wells and the pump stations and other critical facilities that are heated, are they all located, are they located throughout the state? Are they located in a particular area of the state?
Throughout the state.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And then one other question I have for you before you move on to your responses to question number 4. You indicate those pipes which have constant flow. Which wastewater facilities have constant flow?
So at all of the wastewater treatment facilities, the lines, as Mr. Pierce spoke of, you have lines that are moving activated sludge from one portion of a facility to another, and that's a continuous flow. It's very critical to the life and treatment process.
Okay, so those would be pipes that are internal to the treatment plant, not necessarily transmission lines. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, got it. Okay.
So I believe I was on question 4. And this is speaking to participating in demand response or interruptible tariffs, and we do not. So question 5 speaks to.
Follow up there.
Yeah.
So, the second part of that question is what alternative means are available to supply power when there are electric outages? You've mentioned some generators. So talk for a minute about generators. How many generators does the company deploy? Where are they? When are they activated? What's your maintenance and operation program for those generators?
Okay. So in addition to the stationary generators that we talked about, and let me see, I've got those numbers here.
Chair, if it would so please, in the questions we submitted, and the company has provided some responses. Now, I don't know if they preferred some of that be confidential or not. They do have responses to questions regarding number and percentage of all their wells and wastewater pump stations that have generators. And then they indicate that they do have an annual maintenance contract for all generators.
Okay. All
I'm
right.
not sure if Mr. Hill was.
And that would answer my question. Is there anything y'all want to add beyond what you've put here in writing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is, talks about from an operation standpoint, anything that we may do differently. Again, if we talk about cold weather events specifically, ahead of those events, staff would go out to confirm that heat tape and insulation is in good condition that installed on those pipes that we talked about, make sure the heaters in the buildings are functional. Certainly the big objective, we'd check all the generators in addition to our weekly, we crank our generators weekly to make sure they run. We load test them monthly and they are under an annual maintenance contract. But ahead of those events, we would certainly make sure that they crank, make sure all the fuel tanks were topped off. We have portable fuel tanks mounted on trailers for refueling purposes. We make sure all those are full. Trailers are in good condition, that type of thing.
One comment, Dana, just so, and in this response, I just want to clarify one thing, where in the last paragraph where we talked about the emergency response plans being filed with NCDEQ, that was an error in this write-up. We do not file those with NCDEQ, but we do have them within our offices and on site. So should anybody would like to see an example of that, we can provide that.
Thank you, Mr. Denton, for that clarification. Is that something that the public staff, that you all routinely discuss with the public staff? Have you ever discussed it with the public staff,
Not to my knowledge.
to your knowledge? Okay.
Chair, I mean, if they could file a couple of those, maybe one by region, as sort of an example, I think that would be helpful.
All right, Mr. Denton, to the extent that they're not confidential, could you file them?
We definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And you don't need to file all of them, but just representative. Thank
So yeah, just a few other things as far as preparation ahead of a cold weather event, or really any of this applies to hurricanes, which we're much more frequently affected by. But we make a round of our lift stations to make sure that both pumps are operable at each station. That those with not as great a holding capacity are all pumped down and prepared for possible failures to give us time to respond and that sort of thing.
And I would say, in addition, it's not in this response, but similar to Aqua, we do have an incident command structure that we put in place. We evaluate case by case, storm by storm, whether or not it's needed or not. And the structure is very similar to what was described earlier this morning. So
how many times have y'all implemented the incident command system?
Since I've been here, which is over the past 2.5 years, we've done it once. But prior to that, Bryce Mendenhall, who Vice President of Operations for Carolina Water Service, had implemented it. I think Durham Florence was one, and maybe one prior to that.
And who are the incident commanders?
I would, so Dana, his counterpart for the Western region, Tony Console, and myself. Tony Console.
Okay. So question 6 talks about emergency plans, specifically towards if the water becomes unsafe to drink. And much like Mr. Pierce's conversation, if there is an event where we know we have lost water pressure on a system, we would issue a boil water advisory to make those customers aware of that potential for contamination. We push those advisories as well as any other message that we need to send out to the customers. Again, we push out through the My Utility Connect app, as well as those that have signed up for emails, text, and phone calls, we push that out as well.
I would say in addition to that, and sorry for interrupting, but we have good relationships with a lot of our HOAs. And so direct contact with those HOA board presidents, we notify them, they go out and they using that channel as well as a communication medium for those communities that are impacted.
And then we, also make aware our customer service, customer experience team of the specifics of any issue, why that boil water advisory was issued, for example, and the time we expected to take that sample to come back for the advisory to be lifted, so that when those customers reach out to our customer experience team, they can get a good solid answer from the first call. The next portion speaks to how we communicate with state government regulators. And I think that's probably a two-response approach. Generally, obviously, in conversations with public staff and the commission, those communications would go through our president or our community engagement manager. Generally, when we're communicating with DEQ and other operational regulators, that's left to each director of operations to make those contacts with the appropriate regional office. The last question, talking about any problems that initiated from cold weather in the last 3 years, and we have not had any operational issues from cold weather.
I know there was the question earlier about 2014, I believe it was. In a similar fashion, wasn't here with the company, neither was Mr. Hill, but I did ask around, and there was no knowledge, at least, or response of any major issues associated with the storm of 2014.
Okay, gentlemen, we heard from Aqua about their participation in NC Water Warn. Is that something that Carolina Water participates in?
We don't currently, but after learning more about it today, I think it's worth,
It's on the to-do list?
Absolutely.
Got it, okay. Can you talk some about your relationship with Duke Energy or with electric power suppliers in your respective areas, in coordination that is ongoing or will be ongoing subsequent to this conversation?
Similar to the conversation, I'll let Mr. Hill respond here. Similar to the conversation earlier about the accounting issues in different companies and establishing, cleaning up those, we as well have an account manager with Duke. We're in that same process of.
Is it the same account manager as Aqua's?
It is not.
Okay.
But we are working through those same issues. The relationship has gotten better over the past few years. And we are looking to continue the conversation around priority restoration, that we would be identified as one of those accounts or number of accounts that would have priority restoration for service. And so, and similarly with the co-ops and the other utilities that we interface with.
No, and again, our in addition to our account manager, our operations staff, for the most part, has developed very good working relationships with Duke Energy's field staff, for example. So it's not unusual for our staff to reach out directly to, a district engineer or a line crew to say, look, we've got this issue. We've run it through customer service and it's going to take a little bit too long. Can you help us? And when those issues have arose, they have been very accommodating.
Yeah. Can you talk we heard from Aqua about leaning on neighbors for assistance when you get to that point. Specifically, Aqua was discussing it in the context of gasoline fuel. Does Carolina Water have some of those same relationships or arrangements in place, specifically with respect to fuel, whether it's for the generators or for your vehicles?
We do. From a couple of different standpoints, I think probably most importantly, we've developed relationships with local bulk fuel suppliers. These are mostly the folks that we buy, our generator fuel from on a normal basis. But those relationships have gained us that priority service that Aqua spoke of. So, they've committed to saving a truck for us, for example, a load of diesel in a severe weather event. And in return, we go fill up our portable fuel tanks at their facility. So we do have those relationships. I think as well, in the past, when we're talking about a severe weather event, whether it's cold or hurricane, it generally has not affected the entire state. So we're able to pull from our internal resources to pull, Western region folks and resources to the east or vice versa, depending on where that hazard is.
Well, and expanding upon that, across Corix, if we did enable incident command, we can pull from other regions as well as needed, whether that's materials, fuel, equipment. In the case of the freeze in Texas, I know that expertise, including maintenance crews, were flown out of Alaska down to Texas to support the Texas team with their cold weather expertise. So.
All right, let me check in with my colleagues to see if there are questions for Carolina Water. Commissioner McKissick?
Thank you, Chair McKill. One of the things which I raised with Aqua was, measures that they might implement that may go further and beyond what they're doing today. And they mentioned Senate Bill 3 down in Texas and the potential of putting generators at with each water system and potentially at critical, lift stations as well. Have you all given any thought to that type of program or initiative, or what the cost might be if some measures like that were taken over some period of time, either at the most critical locations or however you might identify increasing system reliability under these circumstances?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that statement. I think an initiative to at least put a stationary generator on every system, maybe, as opposed to every well, at least you could keep a system pressurized. I think some things that we probably should have the conversation about leading from this discussion is, looking into alternative powering methods, if you will, maybe, LP for heaters or LP for running generators and things like that. I think that's a conversation worth having and looking into. I'm also a big fan of adding portable generators to the fleet because you don't tie that resource to one individual geographic area. It can be moved across the state. So, yeah.
But making sure the proper breaker, installed, the quick disconnects, those kinds of things for those facilities, making sure that as we go through and upgrade, we're making sure to include that as part of the design.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that those types of initiatives, if strategically taken over a period of time in a very measured way, could be very valuable, in the event of some type of extreme weather condition where they might be necessary. Are there any other measures that you can think of or have considered that might be implemented elsewhere that you would bring value to system reliability in these extreme weather conditions?
Well, one thing I think is we move into the next generation, and it was mentioned earlier about the AMR meters. We are moving towards a combination of AMR and AMI. That will benefit down the road, specifically when you get to leak detection on the customer side. For instance, I talked about freezing pipes under houses earlier. The AMI, of course, would give more of an instantaneous type of information, whereas the AMR, while if you were able to ping it on a regular basis, you could get that information or do the drive-by. So that technology will benefit significantly, at least in restoration.
Excellent. Thank you. I don't have any further questions, Chair Mitchell.
Commissioner Claufelter?
You've got a number of fairly substantial systems that are second home vacation. Do you experience a different incidents of frozen meter boxes or busted pipes on the customer premises at those systems than you do elsewhere? And if you do you have different protocols or procedures in place for how you respond in those communities?
So I wouldn't say we notice an increase in those events. Generally speaking, those second home communities, those customers either call in to have service disconnected when they leave for the season, or, many of them do it themselves. They just cut it off when they're leaving for an extended amount of time. So I wouldn't say there's a huge difference.
You've not seen a difference that requires you to take any different action then?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Just one question. Does CWS also have a checklist for its inclement weather emergency response?
Yes, ma'am. For preparation, you mean? Yes, ma'am. We do.
I'd like to request that if you can, you
Sure.
provide that to us. And also just to be sure, I heard Aqua make that offer, but to make that formal request that you provide your checklist as well. Thank you.
And ours is, more of a pre-planning form than a checklist, so to speak, but we'd be happy to provide that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if you had anything to add to Aqua's response related to grinder pumps and assets that are on people's property. Is that a problem for you all too? Any secret way of reducing the headaches related to those?
No, sir. No, nothing to add. I would agree with Mr. Pierce's statements. They are challenging to some degree. I think a benefit in our case is many of our grinder pumps and residential lift stations are in those seasonal areas, Outer Banks coastal areas in particular. So while I have personally not had to deal with those in a freezing event, typically in hurricanes, you deal with them, but our advantage is those residents are leaving, going home ahead of those storms.
Along with their waste.
Correct.
Thank you for that. The other question was I think as some of these big incidents have occurred, the federal government has reacted with funding programs, and I understand this is a big topic of discussion of access to what you have access to versus local governments, but it does seem like generators were a popular thing to help water operators buy. And I just wondered if you had any experience, whether those programs you were eligible for those, if you had any comments about that, because I do think that a lot of money went into that, that specific type of asset.
Right. I don't know that we pursued funds, and I don't know if they were available or evaluated whether or not they were available. But we definitely would be interested if funding was available. It is something that I think it was mentioned earlier about leveling the playing field hasn't been as level as we would like it to be.
Thanks, sir.
All right, Mr. Junis.
Let loose again. All right. Gonna try to go in order. Well, first, we pose this question to Aqua. We'd like to get your insights. Any consideration of insulating well or meter boxes?
Again, that's not something I'm familiar with as a process. We'd be glad to look into it.
Yeah, we can look into it. I think one of the things, the lessons learned, at least from our mountain communities, is those meter boxes are a little deeper, obviously, so you get natural insulation from the ground, but.
I think it was in response to the chair's question in terms, there was mention of priority restoration. Are there obvious concerns or challenges to priority restoration for a utility that's spread out like Carolina Water? Obviously, you have assets and infrastructure throughout the state, and how Duke might go about prioritizing that.
I think the biggest challenge so far is similar to what was mentioned earlier. It's the number of accounts and the names associated with those accounts and getting all that straightened out first so that we can then be within the systems and it's clear which accounts need that priority service.
So it sounds like there's some miscommunication of which, basically, when you say a name, that might not match up with what Duke has, and there's miscommunication of what you're trying to get prioritized or have concerns about.
That's great.
And you said that is a work in progress,
work in progress.
not quite resolved.
Yeah, that's work in progress. But we are making progress.
There was mention.
I'm gonna jump in here. Mr. Denton, how many accounts does the company have with Duke?
I do not have that number, but I can get it for you.
I mean, is it 10, hundreds? Is it hundreds? Okay. You don't need to get the specific number. That's all. I just kind of wanted order of magnitude.
So, Chair, just ballpark, I mean, they have over 300 wells and over 200 lift stations or pump stations that probably all have separate accounts. So, little assist there.
Thank you.
Regarding the My Utility Connect, when did CWS NC start?
Have you got that number? It's right before I came on board, I think.
I want,
2019, maybe?
I want to say late 18 or early 19. Don't hold me to that, please, but that's close.
And I assume that is a question when someone signs up for an account of do they want to register? Has there been any other initiatives to sort of push customers to either download or join that?
Yeah, so several initiatives. One, our communications team participates in these communities, Facebook and Nextdoor pages. They try to push that My Utility Connect preparation or participation. We meet very frequently with several of our larger homeowners associations and in large groups and try to push that idea through those meetings as well. Yeah.
Has the company made any effort sort of post one of these events to assess or communicate with customers on what communication worked best for them?
I'm not aware of that.
We've had in these homeowners association board members, we actually just had a great meeting recently about a number of topics, but communication was one. And we did ask the question, what's your prime method of communication? What would you like to do? Interestingly, obviously, the board has one communication method. They want to control the message, right? And so we communicate through the board, but we also want to communicate directly with the customer. And so, but we want the message to be the same. And so that's been an interesting conversation, which we're trying to expand upon. But so far, those conversations are going well.
Do you feel that one or the other is more reliable in terms of an email notification or a text?
It's individual dependent, right? It's a preference. It's personal preference. And so we're trying to hit as many communication channels as we can. That's, been part of the, methodology. It's hard to keep up with everything new that's coming out.
Regarding sort of getting into planning for a weather event, how far in advance would you start taking some of these actions? Mobilizing equipment, pushing boots on the ground to start preparing?
So there's two different answers to that. One is we know hurricane season's coming, so we start prep for hurricane season long before hurricane season gets here. And then we start the prep for an individual storm, and that can be anywhere from a couple days before, because we just don't know where the track's going to be, right? But the individual storm prep could be anywhere from a week to a couple days ahead of time. Now, in reference to that, though, I'll add on to that, because we have multiple jurisdictions, basically all through the Southeast, from Texas all the way up to Virginia, that have the potential for an impact of a storm. We actually have a conversation amongst the presidents and say, what are we doing? Where do we need to move people potentially to support other jurisdictions?
I think to piggyback off,
Jonas, I'm going to jump in.
please do.
Just one question, Mr. Denton. How bad was, I mean, what was the experience of your analog in Texas? I mean, was there a service interruption?
Most definitely, there was. We did have frozen pipes. We did have systems that went down. And I'm sure that there'll be much more conversation on when the electric side is in here of the impacts due to the electric failure that occurred in Texas, being more of a merchant style market with ISO, a very different type of market than what we have here. And so the impact was much longer and sustained on the electric side. Now, I'll say that the water systems were back up pretty quickly, because once the cold front went through, the pipes were able to be thawed out and generators be able to put online, but power system was still having trouble. So I'm sure that the electrical side will talk through that in much more detail than I have. But we did have some impacts down there, but we're able to respond pretty quickly.
Are you instituting operational changes in Texas as a result of what happened in Texas, to the extent that you're aware?
They are. I mean, they're looking at the House Senate Bill 3. I can't remember which one it is, but and they are evaluating if they need to be doing other additional insulation or more, obviously the backup generation, or changes to like meter boxes, those kinds of things. So they are looking at all of that right now, but it was such a unanticipated event that it just caught so many people off guard.
Understood. And is there intention at the corporate level to disseminate the information and, lessons learned from Texas and the studies that are ongoing to other operating companies and other jurisdictions?
We do, and we share on a regular basis. The leadership of the company the operational leadership of the company gets together, and we talk through lessons learned from anything from safety to compliance to just operational improvements. And so those are all shared across the organization.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think to piggyback off the chair's question, would you say that the water and sewer utilities are highly dependent on reliable electric service? Does that make your job a lot easier if there's not an outage or there's a quick restoration of service?
Dana's over here nodding his head.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Regarding the Commissioner Hughes' question about funding availability, and I probably should have asked this to Aqua too, but because we're in a little bit more of a casual setting, they might be able to chime in also. But are the utilities making any effort to gain access to some of this additional funding?
We definitely will be pursuing that. I mean, we're going to be looking. I actually, in my past, was part of obtaining some federal money for the grid modernization program within Duke. And so we'd love to see some of those opportunities come our way as well.
So I guess a follow-up would be, are there legislative initiatives to gain access? Are there efforts and conversations with DWI and state government? What actions are being taken to attempt to gain access?
Well, we're just getting started on that front. So I think there's going to be a multi-pronged type of look and see where's our best opportunities. I mean, obviously, time is limited on resource availability, but we're going to be looking and seeing what we can do.
Is it okay if Aqua would respond if they want to?
Ms. Sanford, did y'all hear the question?
I do have a question as to whether you're talking about the substance of the filing we'll make later today, or are you talking about something else?
To just answer this question here in the hearing about Commissioner Hughes' question about availability of funds and trying to gain access to those funds like ARPA or other initiatives.
Joanne, I can answer pretty easily. We've had
Mr. Pierce can do it.
conversations. I'm sorry, I'm Joe Pierce. I've had conversations with John Riscard, Division DWI, about availability versus municipality versus investor-owned utilities. He gave a presentation about 2 weeks ago, and he started modifying his presentation for which parts were, he had muni only, and some of those were muni and IOU. I hope in the future, maybe he'll do one just for IOUs so that we know what's available to us and what's not. But they are very early in the process. They've not laid out their whole program. So they're just in the infancy of following the BIL and getting the information out there. But that was just in the last month.
All right, and I do anticipate we'll learn more from the companies as they make their filings in the docket that we have open at this time.
Today.
Just 1 second, make sure I'm running down through my questions. I'm not sure this was asked, or maybe I'm missing it. How many portable generators does Carolina Water Service have?
I don't know that I can give you an exact number, somewhere between 55 and 60 statewide.
And are those typically the trailer mounted, or is that some combination of back of a work truck, smaller ones versus then the larger?
Yeah,
trailer
those
mounted?
are all trailer mounted, yes.
Okay.
We do have, we have a number of the smaller portable handheld generators, but I honestly don't even count those.
Has the utility considered or looked into any form of battery storage for an event like this?
For batteries to operate the generators?
As opposed to an electric generator, but battery storage potentially?
I am not aware of any ever.
Not within Carolina's water service, but right now we have a study ongoing that's looking at a combination of, in another jurisdiction, of solar combined with battery storage.
Which jurisdiction is that?
Florida.
Okay.
Chair, that's all I have right now.
All right, let me just check in one last time with colleagues. Any questions for these gentlemen before we let them go? All right, thank you very much. Y'all may step down. Ms. Sanford.
If I might, Chair Mitchell, Carolina Water has made available to me a document that I think will be of Aqua. I'm so sorry. It must be time for lunch or something. That I think is relevant and will be interesting to the group. And it has to do, if you'll pass those out to the public staff. It simply has to do with the disaster management mitigation session. It's to your interest in cooperation among entities, including FEMA. So if I might, I'd like to pass this out. It may be of interest to members of your staff.
All right, please do. All right, and I believe that brings us to the end of the morning. I will check in, just make sure there are no other questions. All right. With that, we've come to the end of the morning, so we will be adjourned. Thank you very much.
Yeah.